What is going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel, and today we're going to be doing something a little bit different really, as I'm going to be going through all 7 of the currently known maps in Battlefield 2042, and we're going to be taking a look at the real life locations that they're actually based on. Some of these are confirmed by the devs when they've talked about the maps, and others are not necessarily confirmed but are obviously based on these locations. For example, they've given us a country that it's set in but not the city, and I've essentially just gone and done a bit of research on those locations and found where I'm pretty sure that they are based anyway. If you guys end up enjoying this video, then be sure to leave a like down below to help support the channel, and if you are new, then consider subscribing and turning on those notifications so you don't miss out on any upcoming Battlefield 2042 content. So like I said, there are 7 maps confirmed as of right now, and we're going to be going through each of those in the order that they revealed them to us. So starting off, we're going to be taking a look at Kaleidoscope. This map is set in South Korea, and the city is not confirmed as of right now, at least not that I know of, but after a few very helpful comments on my map detail video on the main channel, it turns out that this is set in Songdo City, South Korea, and more specifically the Songdo Central Park. Looking at these two side by side, you can clearly see a lot of similarities. I should mention, and this goes for every single map, that they're not really meant to be identical or anything like that. They more just take inspiration from these real life locations while making them still a little bit different. I'd imagine mostly for gameplay related reasons and just to balance out the map, as obviously a straight copy paste might not really play all that well, and it is also set 20 years in the future, so obviously even if it was a straight up copy paste of the city, it would look very different in 20 years anyway. Obviously the canal running through the park is slightly shorter in the map version, but it's cool that it is still there, and I'd assume that you will actually be able to use boats and jet skis and stuff on that little area, which will be a lot of fun. The buildings are also much more futuristic looking in the map version, especially the one in the center of the map. It looks very out there and very unique, but I think it does really suit that 2042 vibe. And so overall, I think this map looks great, and although they are very different in a way, you can definitely tell that they took inspiration from Songdo Central Park and essentially made their own futuristic version of it in the game. Now moving on, we have Manifest, and this one is set on Branny Island in Singapore, which is confirmed by the developers. This is the map with the huge container yard that we see in the reveal trailer, and as you can see from this image of Branny Island, or I think it's known to the locals as Punao Branny, it does have a huge shipping container yard, so that definitely gives a good idea of what the map is going to look like. Now we've barely seen any of this map at all, just the screenshot with the chopper in the foreground and then the container area in the trailer, so I have no idea how accurate the rest of the map is going to be to what we can actually see in this photo, but judging by the trees in the background of that chopper image, it does seem to be pretty similar, and honestly it does look like a pretty interesting map if they went with that same layout. I think it'd be pretty awesome to have that container yard take up a huge section of the map, and that'll obviously be the main attraction, but then to have a more like terrain focused area of the map too would be a nice contrast. And so if it does end up looking anything like this image, then I reckon that will be a pretty fun map to play on. The fact that it's seemingly set at night is definitely an awesome touch too. I can imagine it's going to be a borderline horror game running around amongst those shipping containers and stumbling across enemies, so I'm very excited to see how this map plays out once we get our hands on it. Moving on, we have Orbital, which is confirmed to be set in French Guiana or French Guiana. I'm not actually sure how it's pronounced, as I've heard it both ways, but this is a real rocket launch site. However, it looks nothing like what we can see in the screenshot, as well as what we've seen in both of the trailers. As you can see in this image, the actual launch site is super flat and open, and it's really just some fields with a rocket, so it's not too interesting. But then in game, it seems like they've essentially taken that launch site and pretty much placed it on a more exciting location of the island or something like that, as honestly that would be a pretty boring map if it just looked like it does in that image. In the actual promotion image of Orbital though, if you look in the background, you can actually see multiple other launch sites scattered around the shoreline of this island, and so my guess is that they've just set this in a real life location, but then since it's 20 years in the future, they've kind of just made this section up and made it that French Guiana just has multiple launch sites or something like that. So this one does deviate pretty far from the real life location as far as I can tell, but then we've also barely seen any of the map other than the launch site, and it could end up being closer to this than what I initially expected, so we will just have to wait and see. Moving on, we have Discarded, and this one is set on the shorelines of India, and while it's not confirmed as far as I know, I believe this is set in the Alang shipbreaking yard, as that just makes the most sense, but like I said, I've not actually heard any confirmation of that as of right now. Alang is the world's largest shipbreaking yard and apparently has the perfect layout for it, with just the way that the beach slopes down, and it apparently also has very strong tides, so essentially it's just easy to get the ships much closer to the shore to be broken down. This is essentially just a graveyard for old ships that are no longer in action, and then they're broken down to pretty much just recycle the materials and either use them for new ships or anything else that could use those materials. So there are essentially just tons of ships scattered throughout the shoreline that are half taken apart and just all old and rusty, which is exactly what it looks like on the actual in-game map. I think this is definitely the most most unique setting for a map out of all the ones we've seen so far, even though it's not quite as visually appealing as some of the other maps since it's all just mud and rusted ships. I think the overall layout of the map looks awesome and I cannot wait to test it out. Now, moving on, we have Renewal, which is set in the eastern desert of Egypt, and it's essentially a huge agricultural research center just plonked right in the middle of the desert. For those of you who played Battlefield 1, this area is actually not too far from Sinai Desert, which is obviously a fan favorite map in that game, and even though it looks completely unrealistic in this image, as I personally have never really seen a desert right next to a massive green field like that, this is actually a real place, or at least DICE's own version of a real place, as I couldn't find anything quite like this map, but there are many places in the eastern desert of Egypt that actually have a lot of greener areas, surprisingly enough. Like I said, I'm not too sure if this map is based on one specific area in real life or if it's just their own made up place, as the eastern desert is obviously enormous and it could take place in any area within that desert, so of all the maps in the game, this might be the one that we have the least information on, but it isn't actually as far-fetched as I initially thought it was the first time I saw the image, and I think this is definitely one of the maps I'm most excited to play on, just because each area of the map is going to feel so different from the last one. Now, speaking of maps that I'm excited for, the next one we have here is Hourglass, and this map is set in Doha, Qatar. Now, they described it in-game as a city lost in sand, and so it's going to look quite different than it does in real life, simply because the entire ground level of the city is just overtaken by sand, and there's not really going to be any roads or anything, rather it's just going to be all sand dunes throughout the city, so it's definitely going to look very different. That said, the buildings and the city skyline do look very similar to what we saw in the trailers. There's just skyscrapers on skyscrapers, and that does look borderline identical to the game, so you can clearly see the similarities there. Outside of the city, however, in real life there are still just buildings for pretty much as far as the eye can see, but in game that is all just sand dunes as well. Whether those buildings are all covered by the sand or whether it's just designed differently and those buildings aren't there, I have absolutely no idea, but I will say that the outside of the city does actually look very different. There are also a few stadiums scattered around Doha, so I'm not sure which one the stadium in-game is inspired by, but I think it looks the most like the Khalifa International Stadium, but it could honestly just be completely made up, so it is a little bit hard to tell as of right now. Now, last but definitely not least, we have Breakaway, and this map is set in Antarctica, and it is the largest map in Battlefield 2042. It's not confirmed at all whether this was their inspiration, but after a bit of research, I found a place called the McMurdo Station in Antarctica, which you guys can see on screen, and I have a feeling that this is at least somewhat of an inspiration for the map Breakaway. The reason it seems to have taken inspiration from McMurdo Station is because of these big silo looking things that you can see, and from the memory of what they showed us in the early reveal event, there was like 5 of these silos in the exact same layout, or at least it looked pretty similar anyway. There's also then the huge mountain area of the map that we've seen in the trailer, and if you look at this image here, you can actually see a massive mountain in the background as well. Obviously it looks very different than the one in game, but between that, the location being Antarctica, and the silos, that does all just seem to point towards this being at least the inspiration behind the map. In saying that, McMurdo Station has way more actual buildings than what were on Breakaway, at least from what I remember seeing, and it's also much smaller looking as well. And then Breakaway did also have other features like an oil rig and stuff like that, so I don't think this is necessarily the actual location like I said, but it's more likely just the inspiration. But anyway guys, those are all 7 of the maps in Battlefield 2042 and their real life counterparts, or at least inspirations anyway. Let me know down below which one you thought was the most realistic to as a real life version, as there are some that are pretty close and also a few that are definitely very different. If you enjoyed the video, then be sure to leave a like down below, and if you are new, then consider subscribing to the channel with those notifications on. Thank you all very much for watching. You guys have a great day, and I'll see you all out there on the battlefield.